Welcome back to Take a Leap and Transform, a Neurodiversity journey. I'm your host, Joseph K. Muscat. Are you ready to take a leap with me? I always find it interesting as well as upsetting when I hear one's journey of having an early diagnosis and only to discover much later in life that they've had an additional neurodivergencies that were missed. For many of these people, they feel that the puzzle is now complete and that they are now whole, but wish they had known earlier. I bring this up because of today's journey with my guest, Graham Hulbert. Graham is an engineer, naturalist maker, and poet. He has made a career for himself leading large-scale strategic transformations within corporate environments. More recently, he has been building Tulia and using his curious mind, passion for continuous improvement, and experience in the field of change management towards making the cooperative environment more inclusive. Welcome, Graham.
Thank you, Joseph. It's great to be here. Like Joseph said, I'm Graham Hulbert with Tula Consulting, and I like to describe myself a little bit for listeners so they know who they're listening to. So I'm a white man in my mid-30s. I have short-ish brown hair and some small round glasses, kind of a full beard. And like Joseph said, I'm neurodivergent. And what that means for me is I am dyslexic, I have ADHD, and I'm autistic. And like Joseph hinted at, I was early diagnosed with dyslexia, but it took many years before I realized and identified that I had ADHD and was also autistic.
Thank you for sharing that, Graham. So, Graham, as you've stated, and as we know, you're a fellow neurodivergent. And I want to start off with when you received your first diagnosis and how this ended up directing your educational path.
Like I said, early diagnosis was around identifying I was dyslexic. I think it becomes quite apparent quite early on when you hit schooling that you're struggling, and dyslexia was sort of better known back then in the 90s. So I was identified with that early on. And then being identified, so I kind of followed that standard path that happens in school where they go, oh, okay, you have special education needs, and they give you extra tutoring, like one-on-one. So I had like one-on-one classing outside of my kind of core classes. And after a year or two, it was clear that wasn't bringing me up to par with the rest of the classroom. And my parents made the decision to send me and my brother, my twin brother, which is an interesting parallel we can talk about through this discussion today, because I have a twin brother who's also dyslexic, but isn't autistic. So we have this like interesting path where I had this brother to follow and teach me some things. So either way, they identified like that I was dyslexic and the standard tutoring wasn't working. So they sent me off to a boarding school for only dyslexic students or just dyslexic students, which really helped me academically. But also, at age 9, going off to boarding school came with some sort of emotional challenges that came with that. So yeah, that was kind of the beginning of my neurodiversity journey and how my education sort of path went off from there.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And there's a couple of interesting points there. I mean, first off, let's start off with just a little bit about your brother, if that's okay. Because your brother's, as you stated, is also neurodivergent as a dyslexic, but it's not ADHD and has autistic traits. So what would you say were particular differences between you and your brother?
I think so. There's the general and then there's the specific. So some specific differences were just around like, I'm not sure, like his memory and items, like he could remember things that I just didn't even know happened, and he'd sit there and remind me of these things. And then some other specifics around like developmental milestones where I was always a week or a month behind my brother, and what I've realized now is like he was my guide for reaching these developmental milestones that would have potentially flagged my autism a lot earlier on, but I had this this guide next to me, teaching me how to crawl, teaching me how to walk and communicate. So those are like the specifics there. And then more generally, it was like as we went through education, as we both went to boarding school, it always felt to me like, how's he doing this so easily? Like it's fitting in and making friends, and like it seemed to me that it was coming naturally to him, and I was having to figure it all out. And as a child, I don't really have the language to put that narrative down, but as an adult, that's kind of the way I've come to understand it. So yeah, it's a pretty interesting like dynamic having that and growing up with Jeff there. And I guess one more specific piece is around something I've learned, like the autistic mind. This theory, the intense world theory piece of it, meaning like because our sensory systems are so like acute, the world is more intense, feelings are more intense, stimulus and environments are kind of more intense, and that makes us more susceptible to trauma and developing PTSD. So as we both went off to boarding school, one of the interesting dynamics was that was kind of really traumatic for me and less so for him. And it led to, like I said, the academic piece was great going to boarding school, but emotionally it led to like a trauma response of me sort of deciding like, oh, 9-year-old Graham is dyslexic and now he's been sent away to a boarding school. So he must fix this like thing about himself in order to go home. Like, and it developed this like fix it mentality for me, which turned me into an engineer. I love fixing and identifying things. The downside was internally, I was trying to fix myself, and I wasn't broken. I didn't know that at the time, and through some therapy and growth, I've learned that, and now I get to have my fixing skills and a better emotional state, which is also quite nice.
That's interesting. In relation to your brother, I mean, it definitely really speculating here. But it's either what I get and what I'm gauging is that it's either that he was definitely more adept with development and identifying social norms, or he was more adept at masking and seeing particular patterns than you were. But again, without knowing you and from what you described, I'm totally speculating. But that's potentially two different avenues for how things went. And you mentioned the trauma. Yeah. It's interesting in regards to the trauma that it's a catch-22 kind of thing, isn't it? Because a lot of neurodivergence, even myself, especially where how the education system and social norms by the neuro majority is that they automatically point something wrong with you, and you feel that there's something wrong with you based on how they're pointing out that there's something wrong with you, and that you automatically feel this particular trauma, but also that you need to fix what's wrong with you so that way you could be more accepted.
Yeah, well said. It's definitely not unique to my individual experience. I think there's many neurodivergent individuals find this as we try and assimilate into a society that's kind of focused around what is more typical, what is more common, and not thinking about the broader continuum of how people show up and interact with the world.
Yeah, what's also interesting on the flip side of that, I mean, you can trying to pull the positive out of it, even though there's that trauma to deal with, is that it pushed you to identify the strengths that you've had. It directed you towards becoming an engineer.
Yeah, I think many of the neurodivergent sort of superpowers can be ascribed to not just the fact that our brain wiring is different, but also the like environmental factor of growing up where we're continuously solving problems that the neuromajority, as you put it, don't even see, don't even have to solve. So we become adept problem solvers, right? We're like solving problems every day that people don't even see. And the statistics show like neurodivergent individuals are 40% better at solving problems. I think that yes, we're wired differently. Yes, that's an advantage, and also the challenges and struggles of just growing up with that neuromajority sort of stance and view on things leads us to as hard as it is, also improve and build problem solving abilities. So kind of go hand in hand.
Absolutely. Now, going back to, I take it you were in a public school. So, and I can relate to this aspect, but I wanted to get your perspective because you mentioned that it was a poor support. What did you, or in particular your parents may have found being poor support in regards to supporting you and your dyslexia?
Well, I think so. Firstly, there's probably a good time to call out something I meant to say at the beginning. So I private education, and the thing I wanted to call at the beginning was like, whilst we're going to talk a lot about my struggles today and some challenges of growing up neurodivergent, my story also includes a lot of privilege and opportunity, and I think the support and resources I had as a child were part of that privilege and opportunity, and I don't want to leave that unsaid. That being said, like it's still, even still today, it's inadequate, the way we teach and the way we try to pull out individuals and support them separately as a child trying to fit in with your peers. It's kind of othering and really hard, and it builds that esteem spiral going downward where you're thinking like, oh, I'm different, there's something wrong with me, I'm going to this other class. And I think that's generally the struggle with how we try and support neurominority. If we talk about neuromajority, neurominority, or neurodivergent thinkers, is we try and help them separately. And the irony is almost all of the support mechanisms that help neurodivergent people help neurotypical too. Like they're very beneficial for everyone. Like more engaging, immersive education opportunities help everyone. And it's the same at work as you go into like adult and professional life. Like these accommodations and things you can do to help neurodivergent individuals also help the neuromajority or neurotypical people. So to me, we're kind of the leading edge of how to do better for everyone. The things that help neurodivergent people help everyone. We're on the leading edge of that, so we get to sort of benefit from it maybe first when it's implemented, but everyone grows from the opportunity, which is one of the really beautiful parts of like trying to build neuro-inclusive environments.
Absolutely, and you're so dead on that. And it's kind of funny too at the same time where you're bringing change, but there's also resistance to that change because they're not immediately seeing or understanding the benefits to how accommodating someone who's neurodivergent is beneficial to non-neurodivergents as well. And there's always this resistance to how things are and how things could be better. It's really interesting in that aspect, that clash of philosophies. Now, you mentioned go ahead.
I think this touches on like the broader like piece of like change is challenging, and like where I work professionally, even before I'm working on neuroinclusion, strategic transformations involve a lot of change, and it's really scary because it's unknown. We can talk about it and describe it, and we can do a better and better job of like of building a better picture of what that change looks like. And it still takes kind of I mean, your title of this podcast here, Take a Leap and Transform, right? It still takes a leap to make any change, because you're leaving something that you know towards something that you're unsure about.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's that element of fear, as well as the idea that for those where the system works, their attitude is, why fix something that isn't broken? And there's the realization, well, okay, yes, from your standpoint, it isn't broken, but take into account that you are not understanding how it is not working for others as well as it's working for you. So it's not about fixing what isn't broken. It's about including those who are excluded, and how to, by adding these changes, it's not fixing it. It's actually opening the doors to be more inclusive to everyone else. And at the same time, you have the opportunity to benefit it as well, to make what's working for you even better.
Yeah. 100% agree. And that's kind of why successful change management begins with awareness, right? So that the individuals that are like, wow, this isn't broken, like build that awareness. So like, oh, I see this this is a little broken, or this could be a little better. Like once you start with that awareness, then you can get kind of that momentum around like what desire is the next step, right? Then you have desire towards like actually implementing a change. So yeah, it's really critical because you don't know what you don't know, and it's important to like bring people with you on a journey, not try to sort of just tell them how it's going to be. It doesn't help. I think as a neurodivergent, like autistic individual, like knowing that change is hard and something I work with it professionally every day, I think I have an empathetic understanding of any individual's resistance to change, because perhaps like the way I show up is even a higher awareness of like the struggles with change. So it lets me kind of help manage that in a really empathetic way, maybe.
Yeah, because that's about, it's not about being one side being right and the other side being wrong. It's about hearing each other and understanding each other's points of view and finding a way to meet in the middle to move forward. And that's what it's really about. And it's getting both sides to understand that. Depending on what position they're taking, they might automatically see it's us versus them. So taking this conversation on what we're talking about embracing change, being transformative, you mentioned going to the boarding school, and the boarding school was geared towards dyslexics. So what made the boarding school such a destination?
Well, I think the key there, and I did look up this was in the 90s, right? So the school's no longer around, so I can't throw in a pitch for it, but it was really well done in the fact that it was a smaller school. The ratio of teachers to students was like 6 to 1 or something like that, and like every teacher was like highly educated on learning disabilities and the skills and mindset needed to help individuals that think differently to learn and grow their knowledge and be stimulated by their learning environment. So and they really embraced like the difference. They said like this is a difference. They had a clock on the wall of the headmaster's office that it ticked backwards. The numbering was all backwards. It went counterclockwise, which I think was hilarious. Like this sort of dyslexic sort of cute like nuance. It was like one of these, and it was just full of things like that where they're talking about, no, you're different, and it's really cool. You get to see the world differently, and trying to help build that esteem back into students. That many, like the first few years of school, it just seems downward and downward, like in terms of like how you feel about like, you enter the schooling system and it's like, great, yeah, everyone's excited for school, or maybe not, whatever it is, but it suddenly you suddenly realize this is harder for you than the majority of people in the classroom. And so going to a school that was focusing on those individuals was powerful academically in terms of helping me kind of understand my learning differences and get a grasp on them.
So if I may ask then, because you've had the pleasure of being in two different systems, when you compare, what do you see being the particular differences in a system that was treating as a more general learning disability and not properly supporting you versus one that was?
I mean, so I have to disclaimer is how long ago it was and how my memory pretty let's just say my memory is different. So my schoolhood years, if I had my brother here, he could call out some details for me. But I think the biggest piece of it was not being separated, right? Not being othered and put in this like individual or special like support need like room, and actually being embraced as part of like just a peer group and feeling a part of something and not other than the part of like outside of that. And I think that was the biggest difference, which is ironic because there's so many tips and tricks and all the different ways people learn to educate people with learning disabilities. Like the biggest thing that I feel that I remember was like feeling part of something and not other than something, like not pulled away from my peers. So
Yeah, I completely understand that, and sorry for testing your memory. I know working
oh,
memory
it's all right.
is a challenge, but yeah, I can relate because when I went to the public system, they had a special class for those who had learning disabilities, as the term was called back then, and you were taken out of your class and you were separated, and yeah, you were kind of with your peers, but at the same time you weren't with your peers. So I can definitely see the benefit of being in a school that was geared towards dyslexia and being around other dyslexics, and that separate class was integrated with the regular class and the techniques and approach. So I can definitely see the benefit and the huge contrast to that. When you look back actually during that period of your life, what do you feel were the missing pieces?
Yeah, I think so. Looking back, like knowing that I was dyslexic, and still feeling different to many peers, and others around, seeing sort of my brother where like socially he got it, it worked, and for me I felt always like a little bit like on the outside looking in and trying to figure it all out. So I think the missing piece was like understanding that I am different, rather than thinking that I shouldn't be different, like, and that driving me towards this like, well, what's wrong with me, sort of mindset. Is now looking back, if I'd known like about like my autism and that how that I showed up with different like social preferences, it would have helped me kind of accept that instead of just question it in what was kind of really in a negative sort of way for my mental health, of like questioning what was wrong with me rather than accepting that I'm different. So that was probably the biggest missing piece, was just um, not knowing and being able to accept that I was different because it wasn't labeled. So it just kind of it kind of drove inward towards my my like mental well-being. Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. And again, it goes back to what you said earlier about, but that you felt something was wrong with you because of how teachers and the system was treating you. And again, that goes back to the debate about the medical model versus the social model,
Mm-hmm.
where the medical model says this is what's wrong with you, this is what has to be fixed, versus the social model about creating the right environments, where one can succeed in being included with those proper environments. I think that will, ideally, speculating here, that will hopefully remove that kind of trauma.
Yeah, exactly. I can hope so. I imagine just the amount of understanding now that's there. It's promising to think that, like we said, we're going through transformation and change, and whether it's as fast as we might want, it's still promising to know that like diagnoses are getting out there more effectively, and more often than when I was at school, and I think that's promising, even if it's still got a long way to go.
Well, you took the words out of my mouth. Yeah, it's definitely promising. Definitely since COVID, I think there has been a lot more awareness, and the movement has really taken up steam in that regards. And you're starting to see, especially on social media, a lot of awareness going on. But with that said, there's still a long way to go, particularly with diagnosis. In fact, I was just participating in a seminar yesterday in regards that dyslexics are over still 40% undiagnosed in one particular region. So I mean, if that's one particular region, what about in North America or in other regions where the numbers could potentially be the same or higher? There's a lot of awareness, and it's definitely changing and still moving that needle, and we still need to move that needle more. So now let's skip further, Graham. And can you share with us your experience being neurodivergent in the workplace?
Yeah, be happy to. That's like, I think the best place to start would be around where I started to kind of own it more and bring it forward rather than hide it and not talk about it. And it really began for me with putting a little tagline on my email signature that said, I am made by dyslexia, expect creative thinking and creative spelling. And that little sort of cute acknowledgement there of like not just the spelling aspects, the like sort of negative view of dyslexia, but also opening people's mind to like, oh, this is why Graham's got a creative mind. Led to some really encouraging discussions that I guess I hadn't expected. And it led me to kind of want to advocate more and more for thinking differently, for dyslexia. And as I looked into that and started doing that more, like I discovered the world of neurodiversity, and that's like that's what led me down the path of being a neurodiversity advocate, and also identifying my ADHD and autism. So in the workplace, like as I learned to like share at levels that felt comfortable about my neurodivergent, like the way I think differently and how certain things are more challenging for me, and the benefit that I can bring with the things that I have a higher aptitude for. It ended up like in the team I was in, having we were like a really well balanced team, and as I shared more, we shifted our dynamics so that we played to each other's strengths. And it was the first time we'd done this. I participated in this in a way that talked about my neurodiversity. It talked about actually thinking differently, not just like finding strengths finders or some sort of generic like tool that's out there. Like we're specifically tailoring things to the strengths of my different thinking, and allowing my peers who had strengths in areas that were weaknesses for me to like take those pieces. And it was just like one of the best projects we'd ever worked. I'd ever like worked on. It just went so well, and to me, it just kind of made me realize that like there's ways to improve how we show up in the workplace that don't just benefit the individuals, but also bring out these amazing superpowers and allow a business to succeed and perform like at a higher capability because of the diversity within the team. So I got really pumped for that, and that's where I started sort of working more and more towards how do we do this so that it's not a one-off or like example of how it can work, but how do we help every team start thinking about it this way and leaning towards these differences instead of leaning away from them.
Well, that's really interesting. I really like the tagline of your signature. It's a conversational starter, and it gets people to understand and show empathy rather than making assumptions.
Yeah, it was from the organization made by dyslexia.org. So I didn't come up with it. I love that organization. There's very strong advocates for dyslexic thinking and the superpowers of it. So kudos to them.
Absolutely. And thank you for sharing that. And it's also interesting in regards to what you described, because of you being open about it and people understanding that, you started to create what is known as a neurodiverse team, where they're able to support you, they're able to pull out of you your strengths, and you're able to bounce from one another those different concepts and ideas, and particularly having that inclusion rather than an exclusion.
Right.
Now, were there any particular challenges that you were facing, during that time or prior to that time in the workplace?
Yeah, I think there's like many, and it took me like 8 to 9 years of working in a professional environment before I really started embracing this and realizing the flip side of bringing it out and sharing it. So I think just understanding like the office environment and how kind of overstimulating that can be for me, and like the ability to hold down 40 hours of work a week within an office environment was absolutely, and it's looking at the social model of disability, I can say it was absolutely disabling for me to be working 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. It ran me down, and I went through burnout cycles on a kind of regular basis because of this like this expectation that was set around kind of the neuromajority, right, of what people can what a productive week looks like, and then other things where it comes to communication nuances and like leaders or bosses or VPs asking for feedback and kind of the common autistic trait of giving said feedback really clearly when maybe they weren't actually looking for what you really thought they wanted to hear. They were doing a good job, and kind of I think I definitely stood in some mud pies a few times where I didn't quite understand what the dynamic really was, and yeah, maybe burnt a couple bridges that way. So, and again, like, if there was a better understanding of myself and also those around me of like neurodiversity, and like, hey, if you want honest feedback, like, go talk to like your neurodivergent employees, that they're going to be they have less like concerns around giving that they're better at giving constructive, like, or like accurate like feedback, and not sugarcoating something. But be ready, because if you ask for it, you're going to get it. So
Well, that's interesting because again, it goes back to what we were discussing at the very beginning about creating those inclusive environments and changing the model. And you're right, the average 8-hour workday is not really accessible, not only just to neurodivergence, but even to the neuromajority. The average person cannot work 8-hour days. And as we've seen from the last 5 years, not just because of neurodiversity, but also because of COVID, but COVID has pushed the line to that direction, which many neurodivergents were asking for decades before, was flexible working. And there's also the debate in regards to ROWE, which is results only work environments. So it's not about working 8 hours a day. It's not about being in front of in a cubicle in an office. It's about the end result. So it doesn't matter how you work, when you work, as long as at the end of the day you deliver what is expected. And that brings that change has not just supported neurodivergence, it's supported the neuromajority, because now they're saying the same thing. So it's completely understandable. And then, yeah, I think the communication, they're never clear about what they want in regards to feedback, but always shocked when you give them the feedback that they weren't expecting, even though it's most likely your out of the box and your honest feedback. So they need to be clear about what they're asking for in regards to feedback, so that way they're not shocked and you have a better understanding.
Yeah, correct. And I think that also just goes towards like the power of having like a safe working environment, like an environment where people feel they can be honest, neurodivergent or not. If you can have a team that can bring vulnerability and honesty and questioning, curiosity towards whatever we're engaged in, whatever strategy it is or project we're working on, you end up like with a much like more successful, engaged team. And that's, again, the power of bringing diversity towards the work environment. If we look at it just diversity in general, like, I mean, what's one of the benefits of having a team? It's that as an individual, you have blind spots, like fact, right? You can't think and see everything. And if we can, the more diverse team we have, the more blind spots are covered by that diversity of thought, diversity of experience, diversity of background, like, and you end up building a team that is way more successful, way more like productive and high performing.
Yeah, it's also more supportive of one another because they have a better understanding about who their teammates are and how they think and how they process and how they work and where they need the support areas. And again, that comes down to clear communication as well as clear engagement, and making sure that each party understands one another. Let's take a pause here because I want to share with you not one, but 2 workshops I've put together to bring awareness and to uplevel the skills of employers, managers, and human resources. The first workshop aids in building a more inclusive environment in the workplace for neurodivergent talent and in developing the skills of management to be more engaging with their teams. I geared the second workshop towards examining and providing practical solutions and how to be more inclusive to neurodivergent talent in the recruitment process. Reach out to me on my website to learn more about these amazing programs. You mentioned the burnout. And obviously during the burnout, you were doing a lot of masking. Is the burnout and the masking, did this lead to not only you becoming more accepting and more advocating to your neurodiversity, but also did it lead to your realization that perhaps you're more than just dyslexic and you're ADHD and autistic?
So the second part of that question, I think maybe I didn't realize I was experiencing burnout. So until I learned what it was after being diagnosed. So to the second part of the question, like, no, I don't think it led me towards my diagnosis. I think it helped explain something after my diagnosis. It helped me see something. And to the second part, I think, yes, I think the masking piece is what led to the burnout. So like autistic masking is the ability to, and when I say ability, yes, it's an ability. It's also a survival mechanism, right? And if you're late diagnosed like myself, the mask is synonymous with me. Like I don't know. I'm still trying to figure out what is the mask, what is behind the mask, and this whole dynamic, because I learned my masking started as I learned how to fit in within my family system, just so I could like be a functioning part of the family and have needs met. So it started right there at that beginning, and then as I went into professional work, it became kind of an ability, and it's ability that's very draining. But the ability for me is to like, so I think there's something I read that's good to add here is I've heard like I read that 1 in 5 autistic people can take their pattern recognition skill and apply it to social interpersonal interactions, so that they can understand like complex team dynamics and interpersonal like frictions and see all of that happening. So, and I think my mask like utilizes that power, and it helps me read the social situations, understand the feelings behind what people are going through, and it allows me to lead with empathy in a way that's like, I think, one of my strengths at work. But it also, my mask is to intellectualizing my facial expressions, my vocal tones, my social interpretations of what's going on. It's all, there's no, it's not like intuitively, I'm not just going with my gut, I'm actually reading and intellectualizing it. And that, just imagine like, and I'm doing it right now as we talk, I'm choosing the face to make, the tone to present with, and all of this is kind of, it's been done for so long that it's second nature, but it's kind of using the conscious effort part of my brain rather than this innate sort of, this is how I show up socially. So that becomes extremely draining over 40 hours a week, where like my career is kind of corporate leadership, right? I'm leading and working with teams. And my very strength is also the very thing that is draining me and disabling me through a 40-hour work week. So I think the key is figuring out when to mask, who's behind the mask, and like having that power and ability to like know and manage before I get burnt out, that I need more time for myself. But so long answer, but does the masking lead to the burnout? Yes. And I'm only just kind of learning that now and building a better toolkit around it.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And it's really interesting. That particular stat, 1 in 5 use their pattern recognition to identify social norms and to be able to adapt. And you said it clearly that is very energy draining. And it comes back to the aspect of, this is our invisible disability, that no one sees the internal structure, the internal struggle that we are going through to adapt to what the neo majority expects of what is the standard normal of behavior. And of course, that also adds that resistance to, and particularly you're a key example in this case, that adds that resistance of, why should we provide you any additional support or accommodations for, in this particular case, accommodations of having, let's say, more breaks or more time to process, because you're adapting and doing so well, we don't see what you're talking about.
Yeah. Oh, it's so well said, Joseph. Like it's that double-edged sword, right? It's like when you ask for help, it's like you don't need any help. You're doing great. And that internal world that is so hard to communicate when you built this survival mechanism that now is the thing people are kind of feels like paying me to do. And you're like, hey, I need time. I can't do this. I need support. And they go, what do you mean? You're awesome. And it's so hard. It's a double-edged sword. The better you can mask, the less support people like decide or volunteer that you need because they can't see that struggle that you're having.
In the end, then you have this masking. It's energy draining. It's leading out to these various cycles of burnout. So then what led to you coming to realization that you have ADHD and being autistic?
It was through my neurodiversity advocacy work. As I went into the space as a dyslexic thinker and started learning more and wanting to share more and advocate for neurodiversity, I started researching, understanding the various different conditions, disabilities, labels, neuroidentities, whatever we call them, and I started like learning about like in detail what these were and speaking, interacting with other neurodivergent folks who had ADHD, who were autistic or who were ADHDers, like depending on how they want to describe that. And seeing myself, I think once I started interacting with other autistic people and seeing myself, like kind of my characteristics, like that weren't the stereotypical, the way media likes to display it, it's sort of highly problematic. I started actually seeing people like myself and interacting with them, and I was like, oh, okay, like all of these sort of like indicators started stacking up, and it soon became pretty clear to me that that these were my people.
Now, it's interesting. I want to ask this question because I just recently read an article today, actually, that neurodivergence, in particular, autistic individuals who have a late diagnosis go through this trauma and this trauma is because of this recent diagnosis and wishing that they had known earlier. And, understandably, earlier during the 80s and 90s, the focus was on the extreme cases of non-functioning autistics versus those who were able to function. So when you had this awareness, did you see yourself going through this new trauma?
I think like first, when we say like non-function, I think we're saying like individuals with higher support needs that I think level of function is a poor way to kind of describe that. I think some individuals need more support
Agreed.
to be well, and I think I didn't see. So yes, like I understand exactly what you're saying. I saw it less for me, and like working my therapist through this was there's a lot of grief around a loss. I felt a loss of what potentially things could have been, how they could have transpired, and I went through a process of grieving that, and I still once in a while, find that grief coming up, and I have to hold space for that because it can be, it was. And on top of that grieving process is this like you give yourself permission to like accept to like acknowledge your differences. So suddenly like all of this like intense world peace, this like sensory environment that yes, loud noises do really hurt me. Like they're loud. I don't like them. They make me uncomfortable. These things are like real, and you start giving yourself permission to acknowledge that and take precautions for it. So they become more. They come to the forefront, and so at the same time as grieving everything that could have potentially gone differently, you're also experiencing the world through this lens for the first time of like, oh, this is an autistic piece, this is an ADHD piece, and it's harder. It's been a really challenging time to come to terms with like all of the really clear ways now that of the disabilities I have, and that like it's a struggle. Like, yeah, we can talk about the strengths and how powerful it is to have neurodivergent thinkers in your teams. And we can also acknowledge, like, there's a lot of hardship and grief associated with learning this and owning it and understanding it, and building what I feel like I'm doing now is building a new playbook around what does this look like for me. And we talked about it earlier for this, like, around what does success look like for me, and it's kind of on a similar theme of like, well, these are all my differences. Now I get to look at like my version of success versus what a typical career might have been, or neurotypical career like that I thought I was interested in pursuing. So yeah, I didn't mean to segue away from your question there. But...
No, you didn't segue. You're on path, and it's an interesting choice of words that you've used, grieving, and that you are grieving about the lack of knowledge and awareness that you had growing up and coming to that realization. And you also mentioned, and it's not the first time you've mentioned it, in regards to developing a new playbook, developing the new strategies for yourself. So that comes back to what I said at the opener about having a completed puzzle. So are you starting to see a complete puzzle of who you are? And how is that new playbook coming into play for you?
Yeah, I think I'm seeing a more completed puzzle. I'm actually, right now I'm visualizing my life as a series of puzzle pieces. So I've gone very, very literal there. Yeah, I think I'm definitely seeing things more wholly, and so in within my playbook now, I'm understanding the need to rest. I'm managing like how many like highly stimulating like social situations or like loud environments I like engage in a week, or if I know I'm going to go to a movie, like I'm going to like make sure my next the next day is going to be a really slow day for me, because like these things, like I'm going to be exhausted after watching something on a big screen with loud music, and I mean, this is part of my playbook. I watch movies now when I go to the cinema. I wear sunglasses and I put earplugs in. and it really helped. I don't miss a word or anything, because like I'm realizing that like I'm perceiving so much information that I need to dial it back down from like, I don't know, 11 down to 8, or I guess it's actually, to take that analogy of turning the knob down, the statistic is at rest, like the autistic brain is processing 140% more information than a more neurotypical brain. So if we have a knob that turns to like 10, for autistic sensory world, it actually turns to like 14, right? So our world is our like dial goes up to 14. So how do I find ways to dial that down to 9 or 10 when I need to?
Right, and of course, you're talking about the aspect as well as the following day, so you have that sensory energy hangover that you need to recoup from, because of all that sensory or huge amount of energy being used in regards of it's going to the theater or masking in a workplace.
Right.
So that's completely understandable. And
yeah,
so let's
that's another piece, is the masking side. Sorry, it was like choosing, like having a better perception, like and choice of when I bring this forward. Like I'm to advocate for neurodiversity. Yes, I'm going to bring my all. I'm going to bring that mask when I'm teaching courses around introduction to neurodiversity. I'm proud to be able to like pull forward this engaging part of me that has learned to help meet people at the energy level they need, and I like, that's a part of my, now it's a choice for me. It's not, oh, it's a requirement to survive at work. So that's a really, I'm enjoying that piece, being able to make conscious choices of where I apply this.
That's exactly it, making those conscious choices about where you can properly be who you are and apply yourself without judgment, and relay on your strengths. And that actually brings up a question here. So let's pause there for a moment. When you look back, especially now when you're getting over the grieving, putting together the puzzle pieces, creating a new playbook, what would you say are your overall strengths?
Yeah, I think my strength, like, I think all my strengths are related to the way I show up, right? My neurodiversity, my ADHD, dyslexic, autistic brain. So I mentioned a little like the mask. We've talked about this double-edged sword that it is in so many ways, and I think that, like, it's that interpersonal dynamic, being able to, and it's really what it is empathy, right? Being able to meet teammates, peers, and friends, and support them, and come to them in the way they need to feel seen and be engaged with, is definitely a strength, and I think it's a strength in the workplace that we call soft skills. And I think it's so ironic that probably the most important piece of how you to succeed in like a leadership corporate role is actually, we describe it as a soft skill, whereas actually it's like, I know it seems diminutive to something that is probably like a very important factor to working as with teams and leading teams. So I think that empathy side, and then this like pattern recognition, be it like working in a corporate world and identifying patterns that lead to a true root cause in a problem solving environment, or the volunteering work I do where I'm a predator tracker for the Department of Fish and Wildlife here in Oregon, and I can pick up on the forest floor like all the little disturbances and differences that an animal leaves as they go past, and to me it's clear as day, and I think that's one of my strengths there around pattern recognition. I think there's spatial thinking is one I have as well, around being able to visualize, be it reading a map, a paper map in the wilderness, and being able to like picture exactly where I am and understand that, to also working on a manufacturing floor and understanding like how a manufacturing fabrication process works and ways to tweak it and make it more effective. Is the visual thinking. And then like my music, it's a hobby, but I play jazz piano, and I can't imagine that I'd be able to play the way I do if it wasn't for the way my brain works. So.
Oh, it's fantastic. I love the fact that you're a jazz man. I'm a jazz fan myself, so that's really fascinating.
Oh, there you go.
So from your experience then, from what we've discussed, and I know we've touched upon it earlier on, but what advice would you give to businesses to better support neurodivergence?
I think building, we talked about that like awareness piece is the first part to like leading any change. So like, be curious, build your awareness, go learn about what this is, and come at it with the view of we're building an environment for everyone. So you had Ed Thompson here, who's a big supporter of like universal design, right? So I'll talk about that too, is like building universal design. So your organization is working to include all the different ways we show up and think and feel, and then making sure that you can be flexible and supportive for individuals and their specific needs, because it is so specific to the individual. The two things I guess I'd say is flexibility to help individuals, and also building awareness and understanding of like the differences that are out there, so you can shed yourself of that like, oh, it's not broken mentality that we talked about earlier. You know, if it's not broke, don't fix it. Well, let's learn and understand how it is broken.
Fantastic. I love that, out of everything that you said there was two particular comments I like, which is being curious. I feel that they're not curious enough to understand inclusion. And I think part of it's because they're so engaged in the operation of the business, not realizing that perhaps not everybody's included. And it goes back, and that goes to your second comment, which is building an environment for everyone. Those are like two particular key takeaways out of what you said. And lastly, in our prep, you mentioned two things that really stuck with me, which is, and you said that actually earlier, defining success and portfolio career. What advice would you give to our fellow neurodivergents and how to define their own success? And can you both define and give advice on creating a portfolio career?
Yeah, so yeah, and those go together quite well because what happened for me was stepping back and really kind of, again, curiosity. It's a core value of Tula Consulting. Like my organization is like curiosity is the first of our core values because it's so important to just be curious about everything. Or it's so ingrained in me at least, and I think many neurodivergent thinkers are very curious people. So I turned that curiosity towards like, well, this career path, this, like, people say, oh, this is good for your career and that's good for your career, and I was in this track where I was like, okay, that's good for my career, and I never actually stopped and said, well, what is my career? What is a successful career to me? So defining success is to actually like step back and ask and inquire with yourself as a different thinker, like, well, what does success look like for me? Don't worry about the norms, the stereotypical career paths. Just say, what does it look like for me? Like, what would a successful, engaged life look like? And for me, that turned me towards what I've now learned after I shared with someone else, that it's called a portfolio career. So for me, it's turning these special interests like into special interest, deeply passionate topics that I find extremely engaging. It's like an autistic trait to have one or two or many special interests that you just dive all the way into and you want to know everything about. And sort of, if it doesn't touch, learning about surface level of anything, it's like, no, I would need to know it all the way down to the nuts and bolts. So for me, my special interests are leading and supporting change, helping with strategic transformations, like that career piece that I've had. Love it. I don't want that going away. So that's only one of them. And the others, like I talked about earlier, my naturalist, my tracking, and my outdoor navigation and wilderness survival, that's always been a hobby, like something on the side where I teach with nonprofits and a naturalist educator, but it's always like been a part of my life that I care so deeply about, but I couldn't build balance around. So that's a second, the natural world and all of that sort of that piece is a second part of second special interest of mine. And then the third is this making and fixing. The engineer in me loves to fabricate, restore, and build things. So my goal, when I realized what does this success look like for me, is to build this portfolio career. So three kind of jobs that the first is Tula Consulting, and then building a fabrication business where I get to repair, fix things, or build items and sell those. And then thirdly is like, I want to start an outdoor guiding sort of educational, how do you make the outdoors more accessible and less scary for individuals that might not have had the time or experience to engage with it in a way that has been so beneficial to me, and I'm sure is beneficial to so many people. So I want to be able to teach and guide people as to how to be safe and comfortable and knowledgeable about the natural world around them when they go out there. So that's my portfolio career is kind of going to be three different businesses there. And I think the advice I'd give is, as you inquire into this, and if you go on down a similar path to where I'm going, I try to remind myself every day to be patient, because this is a multi-year thing. I'm focusing on Tula right now because this is for a neurotypical, like neuromajority, this would be a large undertaking. So I need to remind myself regularly, like, it's okay that it's going to go slower for you, and yeah, patience is a virtue, and it's multi-year. It's not going to try and do this in one swing, but and I can change, and to be if this starts feeling like I'm taking on too much, it's okay. Like we can change plans. So I think that's an important piece to try and stay cognizant of, because you can set yourself on a path and then feel like you can't change from it. I'm trying to, my advice to myself and I say fellow peers is be cognizant that you can change if it isn't working.
Absolutely. And hey, thank you for sharing that, and what great advice. And just going from reverse, yeah, you need to chunk it, you need to pace yourself, and you need to take tiny steps. And that's especially for us neurodivergents, where we either go all or nothing, or we feel that we're going too slow, but we need to pace ourselves, because there's a lot to process and figure out, and how to make that happen. And it's interesting what you pointed out there, taking a step back. What does success look for me? And looking at a portfolio career is, in your aspects, you're looking at creating 3 businesses. From a professional aspect, it could be looking at what are 3 levels in my profession that I can achieve in to raise my career portfolio in that aspect. That's really, it's like I said earlier, it's a very interesting concept that you've come up with in that regards to defining a portfolio career. So lastly, Graham, actually, this is not going to be the last question. You mentioned Tula. Can you share with us what Tula is?
Yeah, Tula Consulting is my company around it's kind of, the mission is to build more neuro-inclusive work environments, and following like the principles of leading successful change. We kind of do this in 2 ways. So starting with training and awareness around neurodiversity, the power of neurodiversity, the power of a neurodiverse team, understanding what that is, reframing kind of some of the ways we've looked at intellect, the human mind, and helping set organizations on a path of better awareness around neurodiversity. And then secondly is actually kind of by leading by example, and bringing the amazing neurodiverse thinkers that are out there into organizations that need help with solving problems. So it's kind of building that awareness, and also just showing and illustrating that there's brilliance in neurodiversity, and putting a good example out there, and giving people an opportunity to engage with neurodiverse thinkers, and all the superpowers and skills that come with it.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. So lastly then, how can my listeners get in touch with you?
Yeah, thanks for asking. So you can reach out through, there's a contact form on the website, which is Tula, so that's TULA, Neurodiversity. I can't spell that one for you, I'm afraid, .org, O-R-G. So tulaneurodiversity.org. You can reach me on the website, and you can also reach out by email to inquiries@tulaneurodiversity.org. So.
Well, absolutely fantastic, Graham. Well, we've covered quite a lot today, and we've come to the end of our chat. And I want to thank you for sharing your story with us and valuable advice. Dear listeners, I encourage you to check out the show notes to get Graham's details and reach out to him. Hey, listeners, I encourage you to continue supporting this podcast so I can bring you more amazing content. You can do so by visiting my Patreon page, where you can connect with me more directly with several options. Till next time, take a leap and transform.